Okay, why don't we get started then? I have a few things to say before Derek actually gets into his presentation. But good morning, everyone, and welcome to day two of the Envisioning Career Futures with the Humanities PhD virtual retreat. For those who were with us yesterday, we hope that you found the talk and workshops inspiring as well as tangibly practical. We want to thank the University of California Office of the President again for funding this event. So today we are building on yesterday's theme of discernment by moving into exploration. Today's main speaker is Dr. Derek Attig, who will lead us through a workshop entitled Constellations and Orientations, New Ways of Thinking About Your Skills and Your Options. So Derek is the Assistant Dean for Career and Professional Development in the Graduate College at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. In addition to their work at Illinois, Derek is President-elect of the Graduate Career Consortium. Before working in career development, Derek advised graduate students at a teaching center, worked in nonprofit marketing, and earned a PhD in history. And so we're really excited to have Derek here today with us. I think that the presentation and the workshop that they will be leading us through today will build nicely or mesh nicely with the things that Amanda went through yesterday with identifying values. And so I'll just let you take it from here.
Sounds great. Thanks, Sujin, and thanks everybody for coming. Okay, can you see the slides?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. I like to check. I have more than once gotten like a few minutes in before realizing it wasn't working. Okay. So Sujin said today, I think a little bit about skills, but hopefully give you what the title says, some new ways, some kind of creative ways to think about skills, because I think often in academic context, in the context of graduate education, the ways we talk about skills are kind of limited, right? There's some problems with the discourse of skills, particularly I think in relation to humanities graduate career development. And I want to talk a little bit about what those problems are, and I'm really influenced here by an essay by Miriam Bartha from New Skills for American Cultural Studies, and I'll give you a link to some resources, including that article later on. But in academia, one problem with the way we talk about skills is they're very context fixed, right? They're really situated in particular contexts that are actually also kind of peculiar contexts. They're not really like a lot of other places. We talk about syllabi and grading and lectures, right? Or we talk about historiography or close reading or paleography or scansion, right? And these really specific context fixed ways we talk about skills are not really legible to people, outside of those contexts, but even more importantly for our purposes today, it makes it hard for you as the person who does these things to imagine them as potentially flexible, potentially able to shift across contexts, right? It feels really rigid and stuck. At the same time, we have a discourse of skills that is kind of context free, right? That a lot of transferable skills language, a lot of the ways we talk about transferable skills can get really abstract, right? It can be a kind of list of vague terms that make it seem really simple, really easy, like it doesn't involve any work to move across contexts, right? And it actually is a lot of work to think about and to transfer and to adapt skills across context. And sometimes this kind of checklist approach makes it hard to see that. And so between these two things, between the context fixed and the context free ways of approaching skills discourse in academic settings, what I think is we're left with kind of rigid, unimaginative ways to think about our skills that makes it difficult to be creative and, like, honestly, weirder in how we think about skills. And so my goal today, and hopefully you will come along for the ride, is to kind of embrace some weirdness in our approach to skills to help you really kind of do some additional discernment and then start to connect that to identifying different options you have for yourself. All right. And so what I'm going to do in the rest of the workshop today is propose 5 metaphors. Right? So 5 metaphors that I think can help us move toward, help you embrace a different creative and, yeah, maybe weirder way of thinking about skills. So the first one is that skills are a way of seeing. When I talk to graduate students, particularly in the humanities, a lot of there can be kind of a lot of anxiety, a lot of frustration, a lot of resistance or tension in relation to the idea of skills, right? And I think one of the assumptions or the expectations that leads to that anxiety or that tension, right, is that to describe your skills is going to attempt to be a totalizing account of yourself, right? That you're going to be asked to reduce yourself to a list of skills, a list of tasks you can do, right? And that, I think, naturally and for very good reasons, people kind of bristle at that idea, right? That skills are the only way to understand themselves. And I want to reinforce today that they're not, right? Skills are not a totalizing account of you. It's not the entirety of your narrative. It's one way of looking, or it's a mode of interpretation, right? It's an approach we can take to try to understand the self at the kind of interface between you and the world around you, right? It's not the only way to think and talk about that interface, but it can be a useful one, right? So today we're going to work on cultivating and honing that mode of interpretation. Second metaphor, right, that skills are an archive. And here I use archive as a kind of term of art, right? That a lot of you see used a lot in some humanities fields. I don't mean kind of formal institutional archives, but instead the messy provisional assemblage of sources and texts that we use to make meaning and try to understand a context or an event or a person. Right? And in that sense, a couple things that I think are true of archives that are true of the archive of skills that we're going to be thinking about today. Right? One is that an archive is always in formation, right? That new things, new objects that are a part of an archive are regularly created or discoverable, right? That there isn't a point at which an archive is complete or whole. And in fact, it's always incomplete and always in flux. Archives are also contextual. They often draw material from different contexts and in different forms where it matters what the context is, but that doesn't mean they can't be made to mean things next to each other, right? So for example, you might look at a government document, right, but also a personal diary in order to make sense of the same event or same dynamic, right? And it matters the context in which those were produced, but that context is not, those contexts are not hermetically sealed from one another. And I think most importantly, an archive is open to analysis, right? That the meaning of an archive is not set or known in advance, but instead is up for interpretation and indeed requires interpretation, right? An archive is not a list, and the skills you have are not just a list. They are an assemblage in need of analysis and interpretation. So what we're going to do now is shift into an activity where I'm going to ask you to start to build that constantly information archive of your skills by answering 4 questions, right? And I'll encourage you, if you have one nearby, to grab a piece of paper and a pen and fold it in quarters, right? So there are 4 kind of segments on the sheet, right? If you don't have paper nearby, you're just at a computer, maybe open a Word document, a Pages document, and create a table that has 4 cells. I want kind of 4 pieces for us to work with. So I'm going to ask you 4 questions and give you 3 minutes each to kind of brainstorm, right, or free write. And you can kind of approach this any way. You can sort of start writing and don't stop. You can do bullet points, kind of whatever speaks to you. But I want to ask you, really, most importantly, that you try not to translate. I think because of the stuff I was talking about earlier, when we start talking about skills, it's easy to start to try to like translate them into those abstract context-free concepts. And I don't want you to do that. I want you to describe your answers to these questions in a fully contextual way that we can then analyze. Hopefully that makes sense. Just don't try to translate, just respond to the question. So the first question, I'm going to give you, again, 3 minutes to think about this, is what are you really good at in your scholarly research? So when you're doing research, like, what goes really well? What are you effective at? Right? And again, don't translate, just describe, write down the things that come to mind. What are you good at in your scholarly research? And I'll give you 3 minutes. Okay, so using just the chat for now, just throw a couple things in there. What did you identify as being things you're good at in your research? Give you a second to share a bit in the chat. Excellent. Creativity. Organizing materials. Oh, I kind of reverse identify with that. That is not something I'm good at in research. Yeah, thinking outside the box. Mobilizing resources, asking questions, connecting disciplines, analyzing main themes and points. So these are great. I like bringing together different theoretical fields in a funky, weird, interesting way. Excellent. Okay, next question. Same thing, 3 minutes, kind of brain dump, right? Just keep writing for the 3 minutes, keep trying to identify things. If you need to like zoom in, right? Because in this one, we're asking, what are you really good at in your teaching? If you feel like you run out of steam, zoom into particular like teaching scenarios, when you work one-on-one with a student, when you're giving a lecture, when you're designing an activity, right? Just keep going. So I'll give you 3 minutes for this one. Okay, same thing if you want to put some of those in the chat. See, deconstructing difficult concepts for students, helping them write and develop vocabulary, enabling lens that recognizes gender inequities. Great. Addressing students' emotions, prioritizing accessibility. Finding multiple examples. That's great. Ooh, connecting abstract to concrete. That's a hard one. Ooh, encouraging self-advocacy. I like that. And I think connects really nicely to the other one you had, prioritizing accessibility. Ooh, willingness to improve. I think that's a fantastic example. Excellent. Okay. Next question. Same kind of thing. Give you 3 minutes, brainstorm. The question is, what are you really good at when you interact with other people? And that can be in kind of any kind of context, right? Think about people sort of hierarchically above you, below you, lateral with you, friend groups, work environments, kind of whatever. But when you think about interpersonal interaction, what are your strengths? What are you good at? So I'll give you 3 minutes. What are you good at when you interact with other people? Okay. Yeah. Desire to learn who the other person is and what they bring to the table. And really approaching them as, you know, a person, which is harder than it should be. Being engaged and present. Oh yeah, presence I think is a really, really interesting one. Taking constructive feedback. Communicating my value as a person beyond my work. Fantastic. Setting boundaries. Listening. Excellent. Okay, last one. Same thing. What are you really good at in entirely non-academic contexts? So, you know, you might think of a particular context you've spent a lot of time in, or a hobby you have, or a family environment, or a religious community, whatever context or context you want to think about, but that are anyone wants to share. Put ideas in the chat. Like that, assessing when it's time to go with the flow or stir the pot. That's a great one. Making people laugh. Excellent strength to have. Other ideas from people? Encouraging positivity, entertaining myself. That's great. I wish I was better at that, actually. People watching and reading a room. Excellent. Fluency in 3 languages. Excellent. Okay, perfect. So this is, you know, on this sheet of paper or your Word document or whatever, an archive for us to start kind of playing with, right? It's not complete, right? You're going to also, as we even just continue working in this session, if other things come to mind in any of these quadrants, go ahead and add them, right? But this is enough to get us going and do the analysis I was talking about earlier, right? That these quadrants are not thing you can point to and just say, these are my skills, right? They're an archive to draw from and analyze. So that's what we're going to do for the next chunk of this presentation. And so I'm going to move into the third metaphor to play with, which is that a skill is a constellation, right? And using constellation for this metaphor because a constellation is something that makes a story, uses a pattern to tell a story out of masses of information. It picks pieces from here or there that are in different contexts. In the case of a constellation, like wild, luminous, all over the place might come from different contexts, but lets us see something and tell a story about it, right? An example, give you an example from my own kind of archive, is that when I was doing academic research as a historian, something I was really good at was bringing different sources together, kind of romance novels, government documents, nonprofit archives, kind of into a big mess that seemed to have nothing to do with one another, and building something really interesting out of the connections of it. I really liked that process, and I was good at it. Now in my work, I regularly meet with students and have them tell me all sorts of things from their past and guide them through the process of identifying and what some connections are that they may not have thought of. But also, every week for much of the year, I get a CSA box, a community supported agriculture box from a local farm. And something I think I'm pretty good at is taking whatever they randomly have in that box and combining it with, whatever I have in the fridge to make an interesting meal, right? And so I can identify a sort of constellation across that, which is about making connections, right? Or finding constellations, to be a little bit meta about it, that what I'm asking you to do right now, or the way I'm talking about this right now, is something that turns out I'm good at across a range of contexts, right? So what I'd like you to do, and I will give you maybe 4 or 5 minutes for this, is to kind of look at your 4 quadrants, kind of maybe let your eyes unfocus, or kind of the eyes of your mind unfocus a little bit, and see what patterns jump out. What kinds of connections can you identify between the things you're good at in these different contexts and in these different ways? And try to identify at least 3 things. This is hard, like this is not an easy thing, but kind of run with it. Just approach it like you might interpreting a set of sources, right? Look for patterns, identify constellations in your archive. So I'll give you 4 or 5 minutes to do that. So you'll have a chance to talk to one another in a minute, but it'd be great if you could maybe throw into the chat something this got you thinking about. Were you able to identify a pattern, even if it's kind of fuzzy and you're not sure what to make of the constellation? Like, what jumped out to you? I see accessibility, unconventional thinking, self-awareness, and preservation. Yeah, for you, I was thinking about, along similar lines, the connection between that commitment to accessibility and nurturing of self-advocacy and the ability to take constructive feedback, I think, are part of the same kind of system of kind of building and being in community. Excellent. Other constellations this got you thinking about? Yeah, excitement and enthusiasm. That's excellent. That kind of ability to get excited, right, and be enthusiastic, right, and that really drives your work across different kinds of contexts. Ooh, creative flexibility. That's great. Desire to learn from my sources, students, others, right? Yeah, that desire and commitment to learning. Ooh, how making connections is multi-purposeful. Like that a lot, right? It's not just connection, right? But connection that can be kind of have multiple purposes, can kind of work in different ways in different contexts. That's great. And that actually, I think, leads really nicely into my next metaphor, which is that a skill is an orientation, right? I think of a skill and the ways in which it's an orientation as an approach to the world, right, that's exercised through action, right? A skill itself isn't an action, isn't a task, it's a relation, right? It's a, well, as we've seen, kind of a way of seeing, it's a pattern, it's a, in this case, a first instinct in a way. As you move through the space of a work environment or social interaction, kind of how do you orient yourself? How do you start the approach, right? Another way of thinking about this is when faced with a new situation or a new project, what's your first instinct? Like, how do you get situated and how do you decide what move to take, right? So an example for this, right, that I think is related to my constellation that I talked about before is an orientation toward connection, right? But also drawn across my research, my work now in different kinds of institutions and helping students navigate institutions. Another of my orientations is to start from a place of attention to scale, right? And what moving across scales can mean kind of in both good and bad ways, right? How things are structured and how scales sort of, the scale of things shape how we interact with them. So orientation. And since we lost a couple minutes, I'm actually going to have you do this exercise in a breakout room with some of your colleagues. So I'm putting the, that went just to Suji. Putting the exercise in the chat, so you should be able to see that once you're in the breakout rooms. And what I'd like you to do, I'm going to give you maybe 10, 12 minutes to talk with one another, maybe share a bit about the constellations you identified, but then be thinking together about your orientations. Like take a minute, think for yourself, think about your own situation, and then talk it through, right? This one, this orientation piece, I think is really important, but it's hard. It's maybe even harder than the constellations, right? So I think it's actually worthwhile for you to do this kind of in conversation with one another. And putting another version of the question in there to help spark your thinking. Okay, so I am going to make these rooms. Options. Everyone. What sorts of things did you talk about? Any orientations you identified or other kind of insights that came out of that conversation?
Sure. I can do it out loud, right?
Yeah, let's pause the recording. As it, having built an archive and analyzed it in a couple of different ways with the metaphors of the constellation and the orientation, you hopefully have some new ways, or if they're not new, interesting, productive, interesting, curious, creative ways to think about yourself and kind of understand yourself. I want to shift now for the rest of the workshop into using that to explore different possible career options, right? So you've identified the things you're good at, how you kind of engage with the world. How might that feed the career exploration process? And to do that, I'm going to move to my last metaphor, which is that a job ad is a window. Right? I think we often, for like very good reasons, approach job ads from a very mechanical, transactional kind of place. You approach it with the question, like, do I want to apply for this job right now? Right? But I want us to think instead about how to use job ads for career exploration and for starting to identify different interactions, connections between you and different kinds of possible work, right? Because a job ad can be a window into a kind of work in a kind of place, right? It doesn't tell you everything about what a job is like, but it's like the most widely available description of different jobs. And it can at least give you enough, like you might in looking it through a window before you actually go into a room, help you orient yourself, make your way through it, figure out what questions you want to answer about how that space really works, right? So when we engage with job ads in this section of the workshop, I want us to set aside, do I want to apply for this job? And even set aside, would I want this job? That's an interesting question. It's a useful question, but it's not, I think, a useful first question, because that can kind of shut down the analytical process and make it harder to develop insights in relation even to jobs you would never apply for in a million years, right? That you can learn a lot about how you connect to any kind of job and use that to help you continue finding more options and figuring out how you relate to them. Right, because the question I want us to bring to job ads is this one, right? How might you thrive in this kind of work, in this kind of place? Not, do I want it? Not, would this be the best fit for me? But how could I see myself fitting in? What are the kind of overlaps, the connections between the things I'm good at, right, and the things that this person in this role does, right? We're looking for connections between the skills, the orientations you identified, and particular kinds of work embodied or captured in job ads. So that is what we're going to do. I am going to share a PDF, if you can download that, or a link to that PDF in a box folder that has 9 different job ads that are real job ads that capture a lot of the different kinds of jobs that the humanities PhD students that I've worked with have gone into. And in fact, job ad number 9 is the first job I got after my PhD. All the other ads are a little more recent than that. what I want you to do is just pick a job, go with your instincts, read through all of the job titles in the organizations, just pick one, read it. And again, don't ask, do I want this job? Does this job sound good? Think, how would the constellations and the orientations you identified earlier, how would they make you effective at this job? What would you be good at in this job based on the work we've done so far? Does that all make sense? Let me know if you have questions. But I'm going to give you, at least 5 minutes to read the ad while reflecting on this question. How would my constellations and the orientations make you effective at this job? And if you finish one ad before everyone's done, you can move on to another, but you only need to do one. Type in the chat. Could you please type in the chat what job ad you picked? I'm just kind of curious, and it'll help me decide what comes next. So job ad 1, job ad 2. Okay, give me just a second. Okay, so I'm gonna have you go into breakout rooms again for the 8 or so minutes, not too long. And I'm gonna have you pick from rooms numbered for the job ads. And I've narrowed it down to ones that were mentioned already. So once I open the rooms, you'll go to the breakout rooms sort of section and be able to pick one of them. If it like dramatically doesn't work, let me know and we can navigate it from there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to interpret or relate to experience in job ads. Because like these lists, right, of number of years of experience and the skills, they come from somewhere, but as a genre, job ads are not very precise, right? They follow generally really narrow conventions that don't actually help them communicate things. And so I would look at them kind of impressionistically, like as a whole, right? Like if it says 7 years experience managing large teams, right? And you are, fresh out of grad school, have never kind of managed anyone, right? That might not be a great fit. If it says like 5 years relevant experience, right? And you can kind of piece together 2 years experience doing something kind of similar, I think that's fine. If let's say they want some particular technical skill, like audio editing for podcast production, and that seems from the ad like it's going to be the bulk of the job, like 60% of the job, and you have never edited audio before, right? That might not be a great fit. But if it's a communications job, like that job ad 9, and there's like a list of things they want, and audio editing is like at the bottom, and you have a bunch of the other ones, I'd say go ahead and apply, right? I like to think of it in terms of, if you could do a pretty good job at half of what's in the ad, you might as well apply and let them decide whether that's a good fit for them too, right? Because you never really know. You can kind of read between the lines, pay attention to repetition and priority, and close read the job ad and get some sense of what matters to them, but you never really quite know if skill A is important, but if somebody has skill B and C, they're happy to teach you A, right? You don't know that in advance. It's kind of their job to figure it out. You make the strongest case you can and go for it. I'm sort of babbling at this point, but really err on the side of apply, and think about your strengths holistically, kind of just like we spent this whole workshop thinking about your skills not as a discrete list, right, of abstract nouns, right? The job ad is sort of sometimes forced to have that by the conventions of the genre, but the actual doing of the job isn't a discrete list of skills that aren't connected, aren't practiced in relation to other people and in relation to one another, right? And so I think actually applying some of the same ways of thinking to the job ad that you were applying to yourself earlier might be one way to kind of get past that, not get past, but kind of fight some of that socialization against it, and like think about what you would bring to a job. Like some of the questions we were talking about, what would make you effective? What would make you thrive? And make an argument about that. Yeah, I think Sujin makes a great point in the chat that if you're excited about the job, tap into that excitement and tell them you're excited and why you're excited, and go from a place of enthusiasm, right? And worry a little bit less about qualification, because what that means, how that's interpreted, how strict that is, varies from workplace to workplace, and is, for a lot of bad reasons, not transparent to applicants. But take that as an opening, and take a might as well approach. Can be a good one here. I'm going to restart the recording. So the question about, if there are particular technical skills like video editing, or, moderate level data analysis in Excel in a job ad that you don't have, should you go ahead and apply? I think if you could do 50%, 60% of the job, there's this technical piece you don't have, but you're really interested in the job and interested in learning about that, I would say go ahead and apply. And as you were saying, in the process, right, you can, take some LinkedIn learning videos, or, poke around YouTube to learn some, stuff about pivot tables and VLOOKUP in Excel, so that, in an interview, you could talk a little bit about it. I'd also encourage you, it's a delicate balance. In like a cover letter, I usually discourage people from drawing attention to gaps, right? Humanities graduate students in particular like to write sentences like, while I don't have X, Y, and Z skill, I can do this other thing, right? And that's not great, right? It's like a particular academic way of communicating that like leads with bad stuff and gaps. So avoid that, right? But I think what you can do is, if there's a technical skill kind of thing, emphasize your ability to learn quickly. Maybe consider telling a story in the cover letter about a time you had to learn a different technical skill really fast, right? And then that helps them see what you might be able to bring there. I think that's often an orientation or a set of skills that graduate students have is toward learning and the ability to learn quickly, process a lot of information and make sense of it. And honestly, technical skills are, I think, overall easier to teach somebody than non-technical skills. Like when I hire for people, it kind of doesn't matter to me if somebody like knows the particular genre conventions of a resume, right? Which is what they'll do a lot of advising about. But it does matter to me that they can be an active and empathetic listener and can support people through difficult processes. And I can teach them like what's going on with a resume. So yes, I would learn or apply. Always, if you're interested and you have time and energy to apply, just apply. It's not your job to reject you, it's theirs, and don't do their job for you, for them, rather. And this actually, that question leads really nicely to an exercise I want to encourage you to do on your own, is think about, like, this archive you developed is not fixed, right? It's not going to stay the same, right? And so you can be thoughtful and strategic about how it continues to form, right? And so if you look at a lot of job ads that seem really interesting to you, and they all want a particular kind of experience, you know, they tend to want video production experience, or they tend to want that, you know, ability to analyze data in Excel, right? And you don't have that, you can learn it. Like you can add that to you. You could, you know, serve on a committee in your department that is making alumni videos for undergraduates, right? And help out with that process, right? Or you could take a free online course through something like LinkedIn Learning in fundamentals of Excel, right? That I encourage you to think about what you can add to your archive to help you move forward, because it isn't fixed and you have some agency in shaping what it's like at the point when you apply for jobs. So I want to close by encouraging you, saying to keep building your archive and regularly pause to analyze it. You could follow the process we went through today or a different one. But keep analyzing, keep reflecting, and keep looking through windows, right? And you can do that by looking at job ads or by doing informational interviews, which you'll learn more about this afternoon. And basically, that's just a way of talking about chatting with people about the work they do. That this is a process, right? Exploring yourself, exploring career options, finding the connections. It's a process, but it's one you're really set up to do well. You have the capacities to do this, navigate this process, understand and analyze information. And so use that to keep building yourself and building your understanding of yourself. So thank you so much. The slides and suggested readings, some various things are at that URL. I think Sujin is also going to put together a drive to share with you. You can connect with me on the world's worst social media website, LinkedIn. And if you have any questions about anything, want to follow up, please feel free to email me directly. Thank you so much. And thanks for rolling with the technical difficulties earlier.
Yes, thank you so much, Derek. And thank you for persevering through technical challenges. As Derek mentioned, the session on the informational interview will be coming up, but it's actually going to be happening in about 13 minutes. So just take a break, stretch your legs, but we'll look forward to seeing you all back on the second link, and where I'll be leading the session on the informational interview with Sam Carter. So thanks very much, everyone, and take care.